Okay, good afternoon, folks. I suppose first of all, just in relation to the title of the presentation, it's a bit novel in that we're talking about innovation within a box as opposed to outside the box. But I'm very much coming at it from a commercial perspective, where with limited bandwidth in terms of resources and limited bandwidth in terms of budget, we have to be very focused in terms of what projects we invest in so that we can optimise the commercial return in terms of revenue. So before I get into a simple methodology about how to pick and choose the projects that ultimately are going to return the most to your organisation within, I suppose, an infinite amount of potential innovation activities, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is the rationale behind investing in innovation to begin with. I'll talk about, as I said, the simple methodology for how you can pick and choose and define the scope of your projects, your innovation activities that, I suppose, populate your innovation or your product portfolio out into the future. And then I'll talk about some key lessons that I certainly learned over the best part of a decade in the medical device industry. So it's ironic enough that come September, when the likes of Dublin and Kilkenny and Tipperary are preparing to go into battle here in Croke Park, I'm also preparing to go into battle, but it's budget time in our place, and we're trying to convince the financiers and the CFOs of your business how much they should be allocating for your innovation activities. It's very difficult sometimes to tangibilise what the return on investment of innovation activity is, but I typically use a simple schematic like this on the screen to try and explain why innovation is so important to the future of an organisation. So if you take a fictitious organisation with a current performance in terms of revenue generation of, say, $35–40 million, and to presume that 1, 2, 3 years out into the future that your revenue stream is going to continue in the absence of investing in innovation, it's a fairly dangerous assumption to make. The reality of what you actually will deliver is more likely to reflect a decrease in performance in terms of revenue as your competitors who are investing in innovation begin to take market share off you. And converse that with the situation where those who invest in innovation actually year on year grow their sales. You can actually see the real value of innovation in the delta in terms of revenue performance. And when you explain it like that to the number crunchers within your organisation, that's what I suppose really gets them over the line in terms of allocating budget resource and manpower to doing your innovation projects out into the future. Ultimately, Peter Drucker is a very well-renowned business management guru, and he would say that innovation shouldn't be seen as a cost centre, it's a way of generating revenue for your organisation and your business. So in terms of mapping your innovation activities, this is a very simple methodology of defining the bodies of work that you do from an innovation perspective that populate your product portfolio out into the future. So in terms of preliminary project work, this is very much a concept phase where you haven't yet defined the problem. So all you know is that you have a business issue or business problem that requires a solution. So project works are basically a commitment and a sign up to the allocation of engineering time and manpower and a small budget allocation to try and address a core business problem. It is not a commitment to any particular product or project going into your portfolio as of yet until it is proven. And that takes quite a lot of discipline to actually invest money and say that come 12 months time we might actually walk away from this project if we don't get the answer we're looking for. The projects then that do make it into your portfolio range in size. So we categorise these projects in terms of Horizon 1, 2 and 3 opportunities. And Category 1 or Horizon 1 projects are your small incremental changes to your existing products. They're small little innovation activities that fine-tune and tweak your existing products in the existing markets. And although probably not the sexiest form of innovation, this is what makes up the bulk of your revenue generating capability. It's the work that we do already today that we know and the markets that we already know. Your next Horizon 2 opportunities then are entering more into the unknown. It's what we call your adjacent projects. It's taking either the existing technology or market and fine-tuning it and up-revving it essentially. So this could be incorporating next generation type products. It's making significant enough engineering changes or commercial changes in terms of what you're selling and who you're selling it to. And again, there should be a resource allocation given to these types of bodies of work. And finally then, as we're here talking about innovation, we refer to our transformational or blue sky thinking projects. These are taking bodies of work that apply your technology to some extent, but for a completely new and novel application in a completely new and novel market. And the point we're trying to get at here is that depending on the risk portfolio or risk ratio of your company, there should be a fairly well tethered distribution of these different types of category of projects. And the typical industry standard you will see in Fortune 500 companies is a breakdown of 70-20-10. That's 70% of innovation work in your sustaining type projects, 20% in your adjacent Horizon 2 projects, and then 10% in your Horizon transformational type projects. And again, from articles like Harvard Business Review, Day in 2007 actually profiled again these Fortune 500 companies and actually looked at the risk benefit for breakdown of these type of investments in H1, H2 and H3 projects. And again, it makes inherent sense that your sustaining type work is going to have the least amount of risk, and that's why you invest 70% of your innovation activities in that body of work, because that's the least likelihood of failure, but it also has probably the least likelihood of really transforming your organisation in a revenue generating capacity. But again, it's not to say that Horizon 2 projects and Horizon 3 projects shouldn't be engaged in. It's just to have a healthy knowledge of the risk profile of what you're taking on. Wherever the opportunity tends to be largest for failure, there also tends to be the largest opportunity to grow your business beyond its current performance. So it's I suppose important that your strategists and your senior executives have that foresight of how you're going to innovate as a company going forward to fill your product portfolio into the future. And finally then, why have a process? And again, I'm sure there's lots of people in the room that can empathise with this sort of an environment. There's definitely not a lack of effort in many of our organisations. Whether that effort is actually focused and geared towards things that actually deliver results for your company is another question. So people aren't busy fools, but they certainly are engaged in bodies of work that possibly aren't returning to most of their organisation. And certainly it's a get out of jail card when you don't have a process that aims to deliver. The notion is taken from the IT sector. Ross and Reel basically talked about building what they refer to as a foundation for execution with their IT structures. And the same can be applied with this simple methodology that we're introducing in terms of the categories of project work and scoping of project work. Ultimately, it's about enabling your strategy to be delivered and executed as promised. At the end of the day, your strategy are only words on paper, and actually you follow it up with a plan to execution and a vision for execution that enables you to deliver on these Horizon 1, 2 and 3 categories of project work. So then finally then, in terms of key lessons I've taken from working in the industry and trying to implement this type of approach to innovation amongst cross-functional teams of both technical expertise and commercial expertise. One thing I would say is that I've talked very much specific to product innovation, but innovation comes in many formats and many guises, and people can also talk about business model innovation. Again, some of the earlier speakers talked about coming up with clever ideas isn't necessarily the hard thing, but coming up with clever ideas that makes your company money is when you're onto a real winner. So having the vision to not only articulate a technical solution to your commercial need, but also articulate how you're going to make money off it is a real, I suppose, game changer. New ways of going about producing your products, then business process innovation. Again, I'm sure many would empathise with the amount of waste and inefficiency that exists within all of our own organisations. I had the pleasurable experience this week of trying to raise a PO and get sign-off on a bill that needed to be paid. And after 2 hours of chasing approvers, getting the IT system to work, I stood back and said, wow, what an inefficient use of my time and an inefficient use of the company's resources. But those type of simple examples are everywhere around us within our organisation. And finally then, new and better ways of serving our customers. Again, innovation should be thought of far removed from just product. We should look at new ways. When you think of Michael Dell and his business model of direct-to-consumer production, it's those sort of disruptive ways about how we service our customers that lead to sustainable growth revenue streams. And finally then, I'm desperately looking around the room to make sure there's no senior executives. This analogy of the bottle, what's been the hardest thing to try and implement when putting an element of discipline within a senior management team to try and approach innovation. And this guy Gary Hamel in 1996 talked about transformational change within an organisation. And the hardest part of implementing change, surprisingly enough, he said the bottleneck is at the top of the bottle. And he was basically trying to have a cheap shot at senior management who are basically so engrossed in the previous way of how we did things that their ability to adopt change and ability to adopt new ways of thinking is often the biggest obstacle to getting buy-in. And I think, in reflection of my own experience, I wish now what I'd say to the senior management team is that we stand back and have a good hard look at ourselves in the mirror in terms of ask ourselves some open and honest questions in terms of what is our culture within this organisation and what is our DNA? Do we have the discipline to adopt a committed approach to defining a process of innovation and defining the bodies of work we're going to commit to, without, for example, a commercial director coming in with a far left field idea and said, do you mind what we signed up to 2 months ago? This is what I think we should do now. And I would also say to the audience, don't ever underestimate the energising and motivating effect of having a clear strategy and clear plan for success. I spent the last probably 8 or 9 years surrounded by engineers. We're very much technology oriented company, but one thing I've definitely learned is engineers love a good spec and they love a good detailed plan of how they're going to do something. And again, I've seen it firsthand of how motivating and how demotivating it can be when everyone in the business and organisation has a clear vision of where you're going and what it is you're trying to achieve.